Hello. Happy Tuesday, LinkedIn. Just going live for a quick 15-20 minute session to talk a little bit about these new iOS 15 updates and what it potentially may mean for email marketing. If you haven't yet heard the news, I think today was Apple, a conference said they were going to roll out some changes that will essentially make it really difficult to track if a customer has opened an email. So we're going to talk about some of the implications, how you can navigate this issue, how metrics might change and what you want to measure to be successful with your email marketing program, and how this is going to affect segmentation as well, because it's definitely very interesting and you're going to find a lot of challenges, I think, that are currently being thrown upon Facebook marketers are definitely going to come towards email. So it's really interesting, and weirdly, it's just been radio static from any of the main email service providers like Klaviyo. I've had absolutely nothing at all from them yet. So I'm really intrigued to see what their response is going to be to this. But yeah, drop me a comment if you're watching now. Let me know what you think is going to happen. Be really interested to hear your thoughts. Going to talk a little bit about that. And then initially what I wanted to come on to talk about was yesterday, or rather last week, I finished looking at my 100th account inside Klaviyo, which has been quite crazy considering we only started working with it in the last 2.5, 3 years. So I'm going to share some of the lessons that I've learned from looking at all these accounts, some of the pros, cons, what people have been doing, what we've experimented with. And I did have 10 lessons that I wanted to go into, but we're going to keep it short and sweet with 5 today, because otherwise it's just going to ramble on for too long. But let's start with the changes with iOS 15. So I'm just reading from an article now. It says, what you may not realize is that many of these marketing emails use invisible pixels to collect information on your mail activity. We think you should be able to choose when to allow this or not. So now in the mail app, we're introducing mail privacy protection. So ultimately, a lot of the responses being that open rate is a vanity metric, which I actually disagree with. Because open rate is a good indicator that your emails are relevant and being engaged with. And if you look at this comment from Chad White, who is pretty much the god of email marketing, and I think he summarizes it nicely, he says email opens are a vanity metric when it comes to measuring performance, but it's a key indicator in list health and deliverability, which is absolutely true. If your open rates are tanking, then your sender reputation is going to go down the pan. So if you're not able to measure open rates, then that is going to harm your deliverability massively. So it doesn't matter if it's not necessarily impacting your revenue directly. Open rate is a good indicator that your list and sending practices are generally healthy, in my opinion. So if you're not able to track open rates, then that's going to have an impact on your deliverability, because ultimately you could be sending very frequently to people who just haven't opened your emails, which begs the question, what should you measure? If you can't measure open rates, then some of the suggestions, and I sort of disagree with some of these, we're going to go over. Conversion rate, yes, when it's relevant. In an abandoned cart, in a welcome flow, of course you want to look at the conversion rate, because it's directly correlated to like a sales focus in the email. However, are you going to measure conversion rate in a purely content-based email? Like, how do you determine if that's successful if you can't track open rates and your focus isn't necessarily on click-through rate, which I've mentioned before is not a good indicator in my opinion, because sometimes there's no necessity to send the traffic away from the email and onto your website, even though, of course, it is optimal in a lot of cases. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to send people directly to your website. So maybe click-through rates will become more important. If you can't track opens, then the clicks may be more of a focus to gauge whether people are obviously engaged with the emails, and also to segment people as well. If you're going to struggle to segment by opens, then you might want to segment by recent clicks within a time frame. Just thinking off the top of my head, like I said, it's very new at this moment in time, so we're going to have to see what some of the solutions will be. Another suggestion, and I've mentioned this before, we definitely need to track. Marketers do a great job ignoring the negative intent signals, but paying attention to the positive ones, and that is unsubscribes. So you're going to want to obviously look at the unsubscribe rates very closely. And again, people are really good at paying attention to the positive ones, such as revenue, open rates, click-through rates, but completely ignore negative signals such as unsubscribe and spam rates. So that's going to come under scrutiny, and it may mean a change in reporting to how a service provider like us, for example, goes back to clients. Like if you're so focused on negative signals, you're going to have to find a way to package that up and ultimately give more context to the email performance rather than just skipping over some of these metrics and just focusing on the revenue that you generated from 50% coupons. That's going to be definitely very short-sighted, but it is anyway. List growth rate, yeah, but I mean, you're measuring this anyway. Don't see it having a massive change in reporting there or something that you should monitor. That's something everyone is always monitoring, and it's heavily tied to acquisition channels and traffic. So don't see a huge change there. And website visitors, so again, intrinsically tied to click-through rates from email. So it's still very new news to everyone, and it's going to be interesting to follow along. Be really curious to hear what other people's thoughts are. Be very interested to see what Klaviyo's announcement is, and like I said, some of those other major email service providers, because they're going to be hit very hard by this, and ultimately they're going to have to lay a playbook down to other marketers to essentially prove an ROI, because obviously that's going to affect their attribution, because obviously Klaviyo is claiming attribution. And I'm going to go on to something else in a minute after this and how this will badly impact marketers. Klaviyo obviously claims attribution for just opening an email. So if they can't track someone's opening an email, then that's going to adversely knock on their reporting, because if they can't track that, then how are they going to claim attribution? So again, this is something that they'll need to provide a solution to. And a lot of marketers are really terrible and greedy with this and solely focused on using email to promote the revenue attribution. So I think the bad marketers will obviously interpret this and say, we need to create more coupons directly and then claim the attribution that way. Because if you're relying on email opens for attribution, even though it definitely contributes obviously to total revenue and revenue contribution, then you're going to see, I think, a lot of bad marketers just focus on creating coupons and then try and tie the revenue back to the coupons within email. So that's something that I think is going to happen. And email marketers are very greedy over attribution anyway. Most of them have some arbitrary figure in their heads that they're obsessed with driving, for example, like 30 to 40% of revenue. And I've did it in the past when you put that sort of arbitrary figure out there and you say you drive 40% of revenue from email marketing. So you're going to have to prove performance in different ways if that is affected by this as well. And also, this leads to a lot of bad practices with email, because if you just focused on revenue attribution, then the content suffers and the quality of the content that you disseminate to the audience suffers, because you're just pigeonholing email in as a sales channel, something I've discussed so many times. If you're solely using email marketing to generate revenue, then you're missing the point completely, where email needs to be an engagement channel. So you may see a revert to type where a lot of good marketers then take email and start to use it for positive practices. So going back to basics and trying to drive up engagement in creative ways, which I think the platform really needs in general anyway. So you may see a lot of tactics to encourage conversations at scale, stimulate responses, and just overall engagement with email, which is definitely much needed. And as I said, the constant reliance on discount codes and promotions relentlessly has harmed email as a channel in recent years. So I think it'll be a positive thinning of the herd, and good creative marketers will rise to the top in this position. But definitely measuring is going to be much more difficult, and I will be interested to see how Klaviyo in particular are going to respond to that. So there's just some initial thoughts. Like I said, be very curious to see what other people have to think. It's definitely emails tend to take a battering by the looks of things. And I think this is going to be more prevalent across all the main platforms. So yeah, really interested to see what happens next. Yeah, ultimately, I think this is just something that was going to happen for a long time. So yeah, we will ultimately just have to wait and see what the response is from Klaviyo and the other service providers. I think it's quite exciting. I think it's a good opportunity to approach the channel differently, which is much needed. And there's going to be a lot of filtering, and really bad senders are just going to be cleansed out. So ultimately, the people who are focused on delivering a good experience are going to be the ones who come out of this strongest, which is always going to be the best solution for the customer. So not too concerned, although it's definitely going to impact a lot of things that are measured in the short term. So with that being said, as I said, I looked inside our 100th account. I did 12 audits in the last 3 weeks of accounts in Klaviyo. It was pretty intense 3 weeks because some of them were really complex, big accounts as well. And it just got me thinking, like, what are the main lessons that I've learned from all of these accounts that I've looked at? Who is this? How did I get that tan? I'm guessing this is you, Julian. I've been on the outside in the mountains on the weekend. That's how I've got it. Good lighting as well. So yeah, I've just been thinking of what the lessons I've learned from the last 3 years and sort of our evolution as a company. What are the trends that we've seen? What are the bad things that we've seen inside the accounts? There's been a lot of ugly, to be completely honest. Most people has been quite vocal about approaching email completely the wrong way, and it's going to get worse, which ties into the changes that I talked about in the beginning. So I'm going to go over 5 points today very quickly. If you want to throw a comment in there, if you have some questions, happy to expand on them a little bit further. And then I'll save the other 5 to next week or something, so I don't bore everyone to death. So the first thing to talk about that I've noticed across all of these accounts is that the deliverability is just the underpinning factor of success. It really is. And this is something, like I said, is going to be tied into these new changes, because if you are struggling to monitor open rates, then you could end up in a position where you're sending emails to tons of people who are just completely unengaged, which is going to harm your sender reputation even more. And most of the accounts that we've went into and seen really bad deliverability, it's just such a struggle to get them back on track. It takes so long to reestablish that. So the deliverability is by far the most important aspect. And if you set up campaigns from the beginning and just blasted people with codes and offers relentlessly and the engagement's tanked, then you're working backwards. So it's just really, really difficult to start from that approach, and you're just going to have to do a salvage job on any of the accounts you go into. So you really need to get that core automation in place from the beginning. Just the basics, things like abandoned cart, welcome flow, the emails that people just generally engage with and open and click. It's super basic advice, but it warms the sending infrastructure up and just basically makes the audience receptive to the emails. So then when you do start to send to the main inbox providers like Gmail and Outlook, you'll have a better sender reputation and more likely to be categorized as a good sender. So definitely getting that core automation in place is always the fundamental starting point for any good email program. Doesn't matter if it's on e-commerce, B2B, you've just got to get it in place. Thomas, what is a good deliverability rate benchmark? Are you talking in regards to open rates or just general? If you can provide a bit more context that hopefully I can answer. I would say it depends on the segment that you're sending it to, but it can vary across accounts. Anything under 20% for me, just very, very generic, like high level, I start to get a little bit concerned about the frequency or the quality of the list. So I think that definitely needs cleaning if it's below that on an open rate. The second thing that, again, is tied to the first is that this batch and blast approach, when you do just see the big numbers and your eyes light up with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, just destroys the accounts completely. And I've seen it so many times when people just get completely carried away because there's 50,000 or 100,000 on the list, even bigger, and they just think that every time they send an email, they're going to generate revenue, which sort of works a little bit at scale, because if you do have a massive list, you can get away with that approach for a while. But obviously you hit that point of diminishing returns where the more frequently you do this, the worse your sender reputation is. And again, it's tied into the first points. After a while, your performance is just on a constant decline, and it's really hard to get back up. So again, you just got to put a focus on the automation from the beginning. And then the people that we see who are just constantly pushing out offers every single day, I've noticed they're just hemorrhaging subscribers so fast. And if acquisition is getting more difficult and you're having to pay to replenish these people, then you're just going to hit that point of diminishing returns and get worse and worse results over time. So you need to look at the frequency, how frequently you're sending to the customers and the audiences, how engaged they are, as a very obvious, like basic high level starting point. And then you need to look at the creativity from the campaigns as well. Stop just blasting people with generic offers. I know it keeps sounding like a broken record at this point, but you need to look for more creative ways to engage the audience, get them to respond to emails, get them to respond to surveys, different competitions, content. There's so many different ways you can just disseminate content and engage the audience beyond offers, which people have just used email solely for in the last 2 years. And hopefully, again, these changes with the iOS 15 will put more of an emphasis on good sending practices. So yeah. The third thing, and this is something I've been quite critical on Klaviyo, is that put this obsession on revenue per recipient and hold it up as like the benchmark of email success. And it's definitely got its applications. For example, on an abandoned cart, yes, you would want to look at revenue per recipient as a good benchmark of success. But in email in general, if you're just constantly looking at how much revenue for every single send that you push out, then you're ultimately just going to fall into bad practices again. So you may see a good revenue per recipient. And I've seen this before. Sometimes you get accounts with really good revenue per recipients, but they've got horrible unsubscribe rates because the service provider goes in, or whoever the marketing manager is, and they're just creating 50% off offers, codes every single day or week, different offers, just packaging them together. And yeah, sometimes you do get a good uptake to them, but it comes at the expense of margin in the future. So you really erode the profit margin and you burn the list out really quickly. So you can easily manipulate the revenue per recipient. It doesn't mean that you're good with email or that you're providing a positive experience to your audience. So it can definitely be misinterpreted, and you're going to have to look at other metrics to judge whether you're successful on the program. And again, if you're just solely basing it off open rates, that's going to obviously become more difficult for the reasons we've just discussed in the beginning as well. You're going to have to look at different things, such as list growth to unsubscribes. I've been spoken about this a few times. I think that it's like a holistic one that everyone should pay attention to. And then obviously you need to get creative again with the email campaigns and the automation, because if you're just using it to sell, then you're going to be in big trouble, because ultimately the deliverability just tanks over time. Do you recommend, thanks for the question, Joseph, more text-based emails to improve deliverability? I think you need a blend, definitely. You can't just splice images together. And this is something that's been a challenge for us, because we've went very visual with the emails. But ultimate and dark mode as well, right? It's like another consideration. You need to design emails like friendly for dark mode. It can be very difficult to do this, get the HTML right in there. So do you recommend more text-based emails to improve deliverability? I think everyone should have a blend of text to images, ultimately, because you need to make the emails accessible as well. And yeah, like really heavy image-based emails, definitely not an optimal experience for the customers. Most important thing is to have alt text included in there. Make sure that you send into engaged segments. I think this is more important than having text in the emails. Although the jury is definitely still out on this. I actually spoke to Chad White about whether it will adversely impact your deliverability splicing images together. He didn't think so. He said, although obviously it's not a great experience for all recipients, because obviously it's not accessible to everyone. And some inbox providers don't render all the images as well. So that's another concern. Sometimes if you ever open an email, you'll just see like there's no images. But where the images are meant to be. So that's something you need to be aware of as well if you don't include any text in the emails. Hi, Neza. Hopefully I pronounced your name right. Is there any other ways to improve account health and thus deliverability? Yeah, I'm going to post a lot more on this in the next week or so. But I think on a very basic level, taking away like all the more complex, intricate things like the sending infrastructure, I think just sending to engaged segments of people is the most basic starting points that I've honestly found improve the needle more than anything. And then obviously like having consent and having a good sunset flow setup as well, which I don't think a lot of people do, to remove people who aren't engaged with email. So that is definitely like one of the ways you can cleanse the list on autopilot. Good list health, making sure that you eliminate the hard bounces, just really basic housekeeping stuff that most people overlook, where they just send to the whole list every time, and then they have a really high bounce rate. They have inactive subscribers that they're not periodically cleansing out of the account. You need to keep on top of that, definitely, and not many people do, unfortunately. So I would schedule that in every 3 months or so to eliminate hard bounces, get rid of inactive subscribers, especially those who've not purchased, because if you're using something like Klaviyo, for example, they become active again if they do purchase. So you're not going to necessarily lose that data. No problem. You're very welcome. Yeah, so ultimately, I think revenue per recipient, while it's useful in some contexts, it can definitely be misconstrued, and you shouldn't be using that solely to determine email success. You're going to run into bad practices on there. And that ties in again to the next point, is that I've brought this up a few times. A lack of creativity is just really bad in email at the moment, and hopefully these changes will expedite some more creativity in the channel. How you determine creativity? Well, you want to evoke a response from your audience, get them to engage in the channel, which is what it was obviously originally designed for. And that can be different for every single brand. You need to think outside the box. Good quality content is obvious, is the main one, obviously. How do you create good quality content? Well, I would just summarize like the top 20 to 50 questions you get related to products or the brands in general. And then disseminate that out. Use email as a content distribution channel as well, which not a lot of people do. I don't know why they do it across all other channels, but they don't use email to distribute content, which is a big missed opportunity, considering that you usually have tens of thousands of subscribers, but you don't share your best content with them through this medium. So I don't know why people don't do that. So using email as a content distribution channel, Creative competitions. So we've been doing a few things recently with a couple of clients, like a fact or fiction, where they respond to the email directly. Might have a positive impact on deliverability too. Get them to engage and then announce the winners of that competition over email. So just to stir up some engagement in the channel. Surveys as well, like sending people to Typeform, syncing that data back to Klaviyo and then using that to segment people, found really powerful. And you can also ask the audience as well to just answer surveys and create content, give you content ideas, like ask them what they want to see. This is been really effective for us, and we've obviously used that to feed back to the social team. Recently we ran one asking a brand what they wanted to see on the next Instagram live, and then we just passed that over to the social team. So you can use email to collect these insights, and you don't have to compete against other departments. You should be working collaboratively with them, which I think, again, not a lot of email marketers do. I don't know why. Joseph, yeah, dark mode. We're going to have to post a bit more on this a bit later. But ultimately, I think it starts with just having a good designer that's competent and is able to optimize for the different types of browsers that you can have. Like it's quite a complex question. But we should go more deep on this in the future. But I think ultimately you need to have a good designer who understands designing for both experiences. Liam, do you think people don't do that as they're so revenue focused? Yeah, absolutely. It's just a weird misconception that when you get brought on to do email, and it's pretty much like this for every single brand that we work with, they expect you to instantly drum up the numbers and get the revenue high. So it's a mental approach to email that's just being conditioned into people to think that you can only use it for sales, and ultimately it's up to the marketer to educate them and, like I said, be creative and find ways to show the value of email in different use cases. So whether it's collecting insights for the social media team, like I've just mentioned before, drumming up engagement and leveraging it to use competitions and things like this, then the onus is on the email marketer to show the value and educate the clients of different ways to use email. So the last point I wanted to talk about is, it again ties into the last point, sort of flows on nicely, is that email automation in particular, not just campaigns, has so many more benefits beyond revenue generation. So when most people think of email automation, they're obviously, the main thing that comes to mind is stuff like abandoned carts, welcome flows, browse management, and the focus is primarily again on that revenue generation that they can get from it, which again it makes sense from an ROI perspective to set them up first, of course. But most people stop there and they don't consider other use cases on things they can automate via email. User-generated content, customer service being the most obvious one, to collect reviews, go in with check-ins from people at key times to see what their experience has been like on the product. And even if someone is about to churn as well, you have that data on hand, just go in and try and resurrect that relationship with the customer. Just ask them how their experience has been and try and stimulate some engagement on the channel. One thing we've done in the past, we've seen it with brands, is they use it to set up affiliate programs as well. So there really is no limit to how you use it, and it can help and tie into all the other marketing channels that you have in the company. It just requires a bit of creativity and obviously make sure that the integration is available to you. But there's so many different goals and strategies that you can leverage email for to automate that people just completely overlook. And the affiliate one is one that I've seen worked amazingly, because also a lot, if you imagine, for example, an affiliate program, the open, the click-through rate, the response rate is really strong. So that has a positive carryover effect on your deliverability. And then when you do send campaigns, you get an even better results. So these are things that people just completely overlook, because again, they've just pigeonholed the channel solely as a focus on sales. But when you do that, you're missing an opportunity to automate all these other aspects of the business and stir up engagements, which has that positive carryover effect anyway, that when you do send sales campaigns, you have got a better sender reputation, so you're more likely to have people receptive to them. Hey Neza, we also love to educate a buyer immediately after purchase, so we make sure they're well informed once they get the product, and thus try avoiding objections, negative reviews, or returns. Yeah, I agree with you, and this is something that is just overlooked as well when you set up your post-purchase flows based on the product that people ordered. Just make sure that they're educated on how to get the most out of it. Very, very basic stuff, but obviously most people focus on reviews, upsells, and then like product replenishment, like straight away, rather than the experience the customer has with the product. So you can definitely use email for that. And again, if you're teaching people how to use a product, this might not necessarily correlate to like a strong revenue per recipient, but ultimately you're providing a great experience. So if you were to look at just revenue per recipient on this email or this type of flow, and then say, oh, the revenue per recipient is low because we're teaching the customer how to use a product, then if you were conditioned to look at email just as a sales channel, then you're going to think that flow is performing badly, even though it might be providing a great experience to the customer. So you have to adapt your way you look at email and just change what you're trying to measure. Cool. So I think that's the first 5 that I want to cover. I rambled on a little bit too much. Need to check out for the night now from the computer. So yeah, thanks for all the comments, guys. I will post this up, and if anyone wants to chat about anything else, feel free to drop a comment and I'll get back to you. Look out for the newsletter on Thursday. If you're not subscribed, obviously go to marketmonster.co.uk, post a comment after this as well, and just sign into the newsletter, slide in, and I'll be sharing more thoughts then. Otherwise, peace out, and I will speak to you all soon. Cheers.